Welcome back to Crypto Equation, the place where we decode the future of money. And today we are stepping into a topic that has been whispered about in boardrooms, tested behind closed doors, and quietly studied by institutions long before the public ever realized what was happening, because the truth about XRP adoption is far more complex, far more strategic, and far more hidden than people expect. This is not a story about price movements or social media hype. This is a story about silence, about timing, about decisions made behind institutional curtains that most people will never see. And once you understand how big institutions actually adopt new financial technology, everything about XRP begins to look different. The first truth beginners must understand is this: institutions do not adopt technology the way the public imagines. They do not announce early. They do not reveal experiments at the beginning. They do not expose their long-term strategies until those strategies are already locked into place. Institutions move quietly because institutions move with consequences. Every decision they make impacts liquidity risk exposure, partners, regulatory obligations, and market stability. So while retail investors watch charts, institutions watch infrastructure. While retail investors want speed, institutions want certainty, and certainty takes time. This leads to the first hidden truth about XRP adoption. Institutions have been studying it far longer than they have been speaking about it. XRP does not need public marketing because its audience is not retail traders. It is banks, liquidity providers, financial institutions, payment companies, and global settlement networks. These entities test technology quietly and reveal progress only when the system is ready to function at scale. That means while the public sees nothing happening behind the scenes, everything could be happening. To understand how institutions adopt new systems, you must understand the adoption cycle. There are 4 phases: discovery, experimentation, integration, and deployment. The public only sees the last phase. Institutions operate in the first 3 long before anyone outside their ecosystem realizes that something is being built. And this is where the truth about XRP becomes fascinating, because XRP and the underlying technology behind it solve problems that institutions have struggled with for decades: cross-border settlement, liquidity management, pre-funding, slow clearing cycles, compliance reporting. These are not retail problems. These are institutional inefficiencies costing billions. XRP is designed to solve those inefficiencies. That means institutions pay attention even when they do it silently. Many people assume institutions dislike XRP because they do not talk about it often. But this is the opposite of how institutional adoption works. The less they talk, the more they test. The more important a system is, the quieter the adoption becomes. Because talking creates speculation. Speculation creates volatility. Volatility disrupts planning. Institutions avoid spotlight until they are ready. This brings us into the next truth: timing. Institutions adopt technology according to regulatory cycles, not market cycles. When regulation is unclear, institutions hesitate regardless of how powerful the technology is. But when regulation moves forward, institutions accelerate instantly. That is why regulatory clarity is not just a legal issue, it is an adoption trigger. When courts make decisions, when agencies define standards, when governments set frameworks, institutions no longer need to guess. They move. People often ask why institutions have not already deployed XRP at full scale. The answer is simple: they were waiting for clarity. But while they waited, they were not idle. They were testing, building, simulating, preparing. Because when clarity arrives, institutions do not start from zero. They begin deploying what they have already built privately. The next truth beginners must understand is that institutions do not adopt new settlement systems all at once. They adopt them in layers. First, they test internal transfers. Then they experiment with cross-border corridors. Then they build liquidity models. Then they integrate settlement engines. And only at the final stage do they move high-volume transactions. The public only sees the final stage. But that does not mean the early stages are not happening. They are simply not visible. And this is the core of what big institutions do not openly share. XRP adoption begins long before it becomes public. It begins with infrastructure. Institutions are modernizing quietly, because modernizing publicly creates pressure. Imagine a major bank announcing it is testing a new settlement system. Competitors react. Regulators react, markets react, customers react. This creates noise. Institutions avoid noise. That is why they upgrade quietly. Now, let us go deeper. To understand why institutions study XRP in the first place, you must understand what XRP solves. Traditional payment rails rely heavily on messaging systems. Money does not actually move in real time. It is reconciled across ledgers through intermediaries. This creates delays. Those delays create cost. Those costs create inefficiencies. XRP offers settlement instead of messaging, real settlement, final settlement, instant settlement. This is transformative because institutions spend billions annually on inefficiencies created by outdated settlement rails. Institutions do not adopt technology because it is trendy. They adopt it because it reduces cost. And XRP reduces cost dramatically. That alone places it on institutional radar long before the public sees the impact. But here is the truth. Most people overlook the value of settlement improvements is not measured by short-term excitement. It is measured by long-term infrastructure efficiency. Institutions care about 20-year transformation, not 20-day price moves. Another hidden truth is that institutions operate networks that are global, not local. They require systems that handle multiple currencies, multiple jurisdictions, multiple compliance rules, and multiple liquidity challenges. XRP's design fits this complexity because its primary purpose is interoperability. Institutions do not need another volatile asset. They need a bridge, a connector, a tool that holds the system together behind the scenes. That is what XRP represents, not a speculative instrument, but an efficiency engine. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Institutions do not always want the public to know how they are modernizing, because innovation attracts attention, and attention attracts competition. When an institution discovers a faster settlement method, they do not broadcast it. They integrate it quietly to gain internal advantage. This is why so much institutional blockchain adoption occurs under confidentiality agreements. Silence is part of strategy. Now let us explore another truth. Institutions adopt technology only when the environment around them becomes stable. For years, crypto lacked frameworks. Agencies disagreed. Definitions were unclear. Institutions could not commit. But the environment is changing. Regulators are becoming aligned, rules are being written. Clarity is emerging. And as clarity emerges, institutional strategies that were dormant for years start reactivating. That means adoption does not begin when clarity arrives. It begins emerging publicly only after clarity arrives. Now we must address a critical misunderstanding many beginners have. They assume that adoption means publicity, but institutional adoption means the opposite. Real adoption happens quietly and becomes visible only in the final stages. When a bank uses new technology, it is not announced to retail until after integration is complete. This is why many people underestimate how much blockchain infrastructure is already embedded in modern financial systems. Let us take a deeper dive into institutional behavior. Institutions move in cycles of preparation, not excitement. They study trends years before they act. They build pilot programs years before they deploy. They test systems across low-risk corridors before scaling, and they partner with technology providers long before announcing partnerships publicly. That means by the time institutional adoption becomes public, it has already been in motion for a long time. Now here's a truth that might surprise beginners. Institutions already know what digital infrastructure they will use long before they announce it. Institutions do not publicly compare technologies. They privately evaluate them. Once they decide, they commit internally before the rest of the world knows. So when XRP adoption becomes visible, it will not be the beginning. It will be the reveal of what was already happening. Another truth is that institutions do not want volatility during adoption. They prefer stability. That means they avoid making announcements that cause sudden market reactions. XRP's purpose is functionality, not speculation. Institutions know this. That is why they actively avoid hype. They prefer maturity. Mature systems scale. Hype does not. Now let us explore one of the biggest hidden truths: ecosystem integration. For XRP to be adopted widely, institutions need more than the asset. They need liquidity providers, exchanges, infrastructure vendors, compliance tools, settlement gateways, and internal systems that connect with the ledger. This ecosystem has been quietly expanding for years. While the public watches price, the ecosystem is being constructed behind the scenes. Ecosystems build adoption. The next hidden truth is that institutions often operate pilot programs that the public never sees. These pilots test throughput speed failure scenarios, compliance tracking, integration with existing rails, and cross-border corridor performance. These pilots often involve small volumes to avoid attention, but these pilots prove what is possible. When the pilots end, institutions review results and decide which systems can scale. Many pilots never become public knowledge because institutions are not required to disclose them. Another truth: institutions use blockchain not because they want to be innovative, but because they want to be efficient. Efficiency drives adoption. If a system moves liquidity faster, institutions save money. If it reduces pre-funded accounts, institutions reduce risk. If it improves compliance, institutions reduce exposure. XRP aligns with these goals. That alignment is why institutions study it regardless of public discussion. Now we must examine the strategic advantage of silence. When institutions adopt technology quietly, they maintain control. They avoid market speculation, they avoid competitor awareness, they avoid regulatory attention until everything is ready. Silence protects strategy, and strategy dictates timing. This is why the public sees nothing until the end. But here is the most important truth. Institutions do not need to tell the public when they adopt new rails. They simply switch systems. And the public only notices indirectly through faster settlement, cheaper transfers, and improved payment experiences. Most users will never know which digital asset powers the system behind the scenes. They will simply notice that the world has become faster. This leads to the next major truth. Blockchain adoption is often invisible. When systems upgrade, the public rarely sees the machinery. They see the results. Blockchain becomes infrastructure, not advertisement. Infrastructure does not need visibility. It needs reliability. XRP is designed to be infrastructure. Now let us explore the timeline. Institutions move on multi-year schedules, not daily schedules. When a new technology is tested internally, it may not become public knowledge for years. But when the time is right, deployment happens quickly because the preparation is already complete. That means institutional adoption appears sudden, but is actually gradual. The truth about XRP adoption is that the world is far closer to digital settlement than people realize. Banks are modernizing, payment networks are upgrading, international systems are preparing, and regulators are aligning. This environment is exactly where XRP fits, not as a speculative asset, but as a functional tool. The first half of this cinematic deep dive reveals the core truth: institutions adopt technology quietly, methodically, strategically, and slowly. But the second half exposes something even bigger. The world is moving toward digital settlement, whether the public is ready or not. And XRP sits directly in the path of that evolution. Because the evolution toward digital settlement is not theoretical. It is already happening quietly beneath the surface, and institutions are positioning themselves long before the public realizes the shift has begun. The next truth beginners must understand is that institutions do not wait for public sentiment. They prepare for technological inevitability. And the inevitability is clear: the world is moving toward instant settlement, automated liquidity, and transparent financial architecture. Old rails cannot support the speed of digital economies. Institutions know this. Governments know this. Payment giants know this. And they have been building the transition slowly and silently. XRP is one of the tools designed for that transition, not because of hype, but because of function. To understand why adoption remains hidden, you must understand the nature of global finance. The financial system is a delicate machine. It relies on stability, predictability, and trust. If institutions announce their plans too early, they risk causing unintended reactions. Markets could misinterpret. Competitors could accelerate counter strategies. Regulators could intervene prematurely. Customers could become confused. And shareholders could fear disruption. To avoid this, institutions modernize, quietly ensuring that by the time the public becomes aware the system is stable. This leads to the next truth. The public often interprets silence as inactivity. But for institutions, silence is preparation. Silence means something is being tested. Silence means decisions are being made. Silence means systems are being evaluated. Silence means development is ongoing. Institutions speak only when they are ready to deliver. Until then, they build. Now let us examine one of the most misunderstood realities of institutional adoption: the shift from proof of concept to production. Proof of concept testing is where institutions evaluate whether a system works. Only a fraction of these tests become public. Production is where systems go live. The transition between these phases can take years. But once the transition begins, institutions move quickly because they have already built. The foundation, XRP, has been part of proof of concept testing inside financial ecosystems for years. Just because the public has not seen widespread deployment does not mean institutions have not already prepared for it. Another critical truth is this: institutions care about interoperability more than anything else. They do not want isolated systems. They want systems that connect with everything. This is where XRP's design becomes extremely important. The ledger supports tokenization, interoperability, and instant settlement. It fits into modern financial architecture because it was designed to complement existing systems, not replace them. Many beginners misunderstand the purpose of XRP because they focus on the asset rather than the system. XRP is not meant to be the face of global finance. It is meant to be the engine hidden beneath the surface. Engines are not advertised. Engines are not glamorized. Engines are not discussed publicly. Engines simply run. That is the nature of infrastructure. XRP is infrastructure. This brings us to another truth. Institutions do not always want the public to know what technologies they choose. Knowledge is leverage. If competitors know which rails a bank is adopting, they can adjust strategies. If markets know too early, adoption becomes politicized. If customers misunderstand, they become anxious. Institutions avoid unnecessary attention by quietly modernizing and revealing progress only when the system is fully operational. Now let us look deeper into how regulatory shifts influence this hidden adoption. Institutions cannot adopt technology aggressively when the rules are unclear. But when regulatory clarity emerges, adoption accelerates behind the scenes. Even before public arguments end, institutions begin updating their internal roadmaps. Because regulatory clarity does not start adoption, it unlocks adoption. Consider this pattern throughout history. When internet regulations became clear, companies that had been testing quietly suddenly launched massive online systems. When mobile app regulations emerged, companies that had been experimenting rolled out full platforms. When cloud computing received clarity, adoption exploded because corporations had already built infrastructure privately. The same pattern applies to digital assets. When regulations become consistent, the systems built in silence begin entering production. Now let us examine the next truth. Institutional adoption is not driven by excitement, it is driven by necessity. Necessity accelerates change. Traditional payment rails are outdated. They rely on messaging instead of settlement. They require pre-funded accounts. They cannot scale with digital commerce. They cannot handle increasing transaction loads. They cannot support global interoperability. Institutions face pressure to modernize because the world is becoming digital faster than the system can adapt. XRP and other settlement-oriented technologies provide solutions the old system cannot deliver. This leads us to one of the most important truths. Big institutions do not hide adoption to deceive the public. They hide it to protect the transition. Financial stability requires control. Sudden public excitement disrupts control. Institutions must upgrade carefully to prevent shocks. This is why adoption is slow, structured, silent, and revealed only when stable. But the greatest truth of all is this. Institutions are not waiting for the public to understand. XRP. They are waiting for the environment to support deployment. That environment is now forming. Regulations are aligning. Global liquidity models are being tested. Interoperability standards are emerging. Tokenization is accelerating across financial markets. Settlement modernization is becoming an international priority. Everything is moving in the direction XRP was designed for. Now let us explore what this means for the future. The shift toward digital settlement is not optional. It is necessary. It is inevitable. And it is already underway. Banks will use digital rails. Payment companies will integrate digital liquidity. Governments will use blockchain for transparency. Corporations will tokenize value. And the world will rely on instant settlement to operate digital commerce at scale. In this future, XRP sits in a unique position not because of speculation, but because of architecture. Its speed, efficiency, stability, and interoperability match the requirements of modern financial systems. That does not mean every institution will use it, but it means many institutions will explore it. And exploration leads to experimentation. Experimentation leads to integration. Integration leads to deployment. Deployment leads to adoption. The truth institutions do not advertise is that the transformation is not coming, it is already happening. They do not want early speculation to disrupt the infrastructure they are building. They do not want competitors guessing their strategies. They do not want regulators slowing progress out of caution. They do not want markets reacting prematurely. They want stability during transition. This is why XRP adoption appears invisible. It is not hidden because nothing is happening. It is hidden because everything is happening. The public sees only 1% of the process. Institutions operate the other 99% behind closed doors. And when the world finally sees the results, it will look sudden, but it will not be sudden. It will be the visible outcome of years of silent preparation. This is the truth. Big institutions do not openly share. XRP adoption is a long game, a quiet game, a strategic game, and the world is approaching the stage where the silence breaks. The digital era does not wait. Innovation does not pause. Financial systems do not remain outdated forever. They evolve. And XRP was designed for that evolution. The people who understand this now will be the ones who recognize what is unfolding. When the world finally sees the full picture, institutions modernize slowly until they modernize suddenly. And when that moment arrives, it becomes clear that adoption was building quietly all along. The first half of this cinematic deep dive reveals the core truth: institutions adopt technology quietly, methodically, strategically and slowly, but the second half exposes something even bigger. The world is moving toward digital settlement whether the public is ready or not, and XRP sits directly in the path of that evolution.